Welcome back to the zoo where my Planet Zoo journey first began, and apparently I'm still not done fixing it. Last episode we tackled the Aldabra Giant Tortoise habitat, and while that makeover was definitely an improvement, there are still plenty of habitats in this zoo that need some serious attention. So we're back for round 2. This time we're taking on the timber wolf habitat, and while I can actually see the vision I was kind of going for here, it definitely needs a little bit of help. So let's get started. So here is the timber wolf habitat, and honestly, I don't hate the idea behind it. I can actually see what I was trying to do here. We've got this big cave structure, a little bit of elevation, and the beginnings of what I could believe would be quite a natural looking habitat. The problem is it just didn't quite work. Everything feels a little bit cramped and awkward, and the whole thing needs some shaping up. I definitely think I can keep the cave idea because I really like that part of the original design, and to be honest, I pretty much do them for every single timber wolf habitat that I do. Your girl likes caves, what can I say? I just want it to feel much more spacious and natural this time round. While I'm working on the layout, let's talk about the animals we're actually building for. Timber wolves are found across a huge area of the northern hemisphere. They're incredibly adaptable animals that can live in a surprisingly wide range of environments, from forest and grasslands to some seriously cold northern regions. And unlike some predators that specialize in one particular type of prey, wolves are generalists. Basically, if they can catch it, there's a pretty good chance they'll eat it, which is probably why they're so successful across such a huge range of environments. Now, one thing I absolutely love adding to my habitats is natural flowing water. Honestly, I'll pretty much use any excuse I can find to add a waterfall. Does this habitat need a waterfall? Probably not. Am I going to add one anyway? Absolutely. I think adding moving water just adds so much life to our habitat. Instead of having boring, completely flat water sources, I want this to feel like the wolves have a natural stream, just running through their enclosure. And I think it's going to look really good once it's all finished. My second favourite thing to add to habitats is rocks. You probably could have guessed it, and lots of them. If you've watched any of my builds before, you'll probably know that I have absolutely no idea when to call it with rocks. But I think rocks are one of those things that can completely change the look of a habitat. They help break up flat terrain, make waterfalls look more natural, and give animals different areas to explore. I'm trying to create a more natural rock formation around the cave rather than making it look symmetrical. I want it to feel like it belongs there naturally. And to be honest, looking back on the footage, I just realized I completely forgot to add waterfall effects. So apparently I spent all that time making waterfalls and forgot to actually make the waterfall. Whoopsie-doodle. Now it's time for another one of my favorite things to do, and that is to put plants absolutely everywhere. For this habitat, I'm going for a real foresty feel. I want the wolves to feel like they're surrounded by dense woodland rather than being in a giant open field. I'm starting with some of the larger trees, then working my way down to the smaller plants and bushes. One thing I've learned from building over the years is that you don't necessarily need to fill every single space of the ground with plants. It's more about like creating the layers. So tall trees at the back, medium-sized plants in the middle, and then like smaller vegetation towards the front. It gives the habitat more depth without making it feel completely overcrowded. And you don't really want to block any of the views from one part of the habitat by putting too many big plants at the front, you know? Here's a little fun wolfy fact for you. Wolves are incredibly social animals. Their howls can serve a number of purposes. They can use them as alarm calls, to gather the pack together, to locate other members if they've become separated, or even to communicate over incredibly long distances. So if you've ever heard wolves howling in the wild, there's a pretty good chance they're not just doing it because they feel like it, they're actually communicating with each other. The more I progress through this habitat, the more I realize that I've come into a slight problem. There's too many wolves and not enough space. Past Evie apparently didn't think about how many animals this habitat could actually support, and while I would absolutely love to keep them all, this habitat is going to become way too crowded if I do. So unfortunately, some of them are going to have to be released to the wild. And honestly, I think it's probably a good example of something I've learnt since I first started building this zoo. It's really easy to focus on making the habitats look nice, then realizing after the fact there's no longer enough space. So I'm going to reduce the pack slightly and give the remaining wolves plenty of room to explore. And because they still didn't have enough space, my bad guys, I'm going to have to steal some space from the crocodiles next door. They have plenty, they're not going to know they're missing it, it's fine. Sorry crocodiles. But I think this little bit of extra space is going to make a big difference. I'm not dramatically increasing the size of the habitat, but every little bit helps when you're trying to make the wolves happy. Another fun wolf fact for you. Wolves are also incredibly tough animals when it comes to cold weather. In some of the coldest parts of their range, they can tolerate temperatures as low as minus 40 degrees Celsius. That is so cold. When conditions get really cold, wolves will sometimes lie close to the grounds and use their bushy tails almost like a blanket to cover their faces. Which, at this moment, I can completely relate to. I'm in the throes of winter right now. Except I don't use a giant furry tail, I just have 3 blankets and refuse to leave the house. The old barriers definitely needed some attention, so I'm going to clean these up and make the viewing area feel a little bit more intentional. I'm using a barrier that I don't use often. I can't remember what it's called. It's not the chain link, it's like maybe the chain mesh? Don't hold me to that. I don't want the guests just to walk up to a giant wall and stare into the enclosure. So I wanted it to make it feel a little bit nicer. I've also included some habitat boards and some educational speakers so the guests can definitely learn about these incredible animals while they're there. I then remembered from the last episode that my Aldabra Giant Tortoise was still getting stressed by the guests, so I've gone back to fix that as well. I'm just adding some one-way glass to the barrier. Hopefully this will allow the guests to get a good look at the tortoise without making them feel like they're constantly being watched. I'm also adding a habitat board and some educational speakers just so the guests can learn about the animals while we're doing it, because apparently I can build an entire habitat and still forget the 2 things that tell people what animal they're looking at. But unfortunately, the tortoise is still stressed, so I'm going to double the height of the barrier and hope that that gives them a little bit more privacy and stops them from getting quite as stressed. I'm not sure if this is going to work, but at this point I'm willing to try anything. If it doesn't work, we'll just pretend this never happened and deal with it again in another episode. And now, it's the time you've all been waiting for. Let's see the difference. Here is the original Timberwolf habitat, and there is the new. And honestly, I think this might be one of my biggest improvements yet. And most importantly, it feels like a habitat they deserve. So what do you think? Did I manage to give my Timberwolves the habitat they deserve? And do you think it's an improvement over the original? Let me know down in the comments, because I'd love to hear what you think. I've still got plenty of habitats left in this old zoo, so this makeover journey is definitely not over. In the next episode, we'll be tackling another one of my oldest habitats, the Warthogs. And trust me, it might be even worse than this one. If you don't want to miss the next episode, make sure to subscribe and come along for the rest of the journey as we slowly transform my very first planet zoo into a zoo that I'm actually proud of. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!